Hello everyone, greetings from the 7th of Nero, AJ here, and this will be the first video covering various people or creatures of note from one place or another in Caen, with examples of them found throughout the setting. As might seem rather obvious, this draws inspiration from, and looks to expand on, the Guts and Gears series from No Quarter. That said, where Guts and Gears draws from army rosters, this series will provide content on both playable and non-playable elements from the game's world, and overlaps with that article series won't be that common. Which is ironic, considering that the topic of this first entry was covered in one of the earliest issues of No Quarter back in 2007. But still, I will take this opportunity to provide my take on a character I find quite intriguing, minimal impact though he may have had on the story as a whole. Warpwolves predate the Circle Orboros by several centuries, though quite how long no one can say for certain. They came about as a desire to idealize the innate primal qualities amongst cultists of the Devourer, who at the time tended towards referring to their god as the beast of all shapes. Using an elixir that had been imbued with a primal magic from long traditional rituals, worshippers could transform themselves into that sought-after ideal, combining the base and animalistic essence of man with the mania brought on by the cycles of the moons. After consumption, this transformation would then occur involuntarily when distressed or injured. The fullness of the moons would affect the speed of transformation and the strength imbued to them on the hunt or in battle. And afterwards, when the bestial fury subsided, human nature would start to resume control, leading to a slow and painful transformation back to their human form. Descendants of those who first used this formula secreted it away, and it only became known again outside of the Warpwolf bloodlines and those they trusted most after the founding of the Circle Orboros that some of the Warpwolves themselves contributed to. Seeing their old ways of adherence to the Devourer worm under threat from the encroaching cities and industries of civilized humanity, these far-flung tribes entrusted the formula to druids, who quickly realized the value of having a force of Warpwolves available to them, and these beasts have been a staple of their warbands ever since. The most common form of the Warpwolf is the tribal or cultist Warpwolf, and several generations of these extremely zealous followers gave rise to what amounts to a separate species that lives on the furthest fringes of society. Historic Warpwolves' personalities changed with time spent alternating between man and beast, prone to emotional extremes, veering between emollient and violent with little warning, as would come to happen to new Warpwolves created for service to the druids. Eventually, they shunned the taint of human civilization and formed communities amongst their own kind, the basis of the old Warpwolf bloodlines, or sought isolation. The latter, predictably, would either join the former, die out, or, during the early days of the Circle Orboros, seek out the druids who could calm their furious nature. As the circle grew, many of the small scattered Warpwolf communities would readily lend their strength to them on occasion as an outlet for uninhibited violence. Some would stay among the Blackclads to partake in their battles at every chance, as do their successors now. Those who adapted, acquiring a preference that borders on addiction to their Warpwolf state, and let themselves go entirely to what nature intended for a Warpwolf, proved to flourish best in battle, comfortable amidst the unbridled slaughter and bloodshed. They were the ones the beast shapers of the Circle Orboros would invite to permanent service within their order, so flexible a weapon they could become, ideal for causing terror and destruction among the civilized. However, when a human unfamiliar with the ways of the Warpwolf bloodlines takes in the elixir, it takes a phenomenal force of will just to restrain themselves from lashing out to excess at anything and everything in sight during the first transformation when the moon of Calder is full. No few newly transformed Warpwolves have been put out of their misery because they were unable to overcome or subconsciously come to terms with the pure animalistic instincts that the elixir compels them to act upon. Others are rendered useless to their masters because they reflect with abjection at their actions when they return to human form, betraying insufficient zeal for the Devourer. These unfortunate cultists often flee from the druids, unable to resolve themselves with the destructiveness of their beastly forms, only to live in hermitage and die in deprivation. A rare few among them managed to obtain a quicksilver tonic to suppress the transformation, but before long, the compulsion to become a wolf grows too strong to resist. For most other Warpwolves, though, the need to balance the dual nature of beast and man becomes a struggle that continues, if in a different manner, into battle, wherein the primal magic brought on by the elixir manifests itself in the most primitive of ways, the warping that occurs being simple and predictable. Even if they become accustomed to their Warpwolf form within a year or so, as most tend to, they remain simple creatures, unable to retain their human intellect while transformed. This is, perhaps, a small mercy. These specimens of what may be labelled as feral warpwolves often require close oversight from druids or warlocks to make sure that they do not lose control at inopportune times or in ways that would compromise the activities of the Circle Orboros. Many of the Warpwolf bloodlines can also be considered feral warpwolves, if only because of comparable combat abilities and somewhat meagre investment in the development of their primal warping magic from generation to generation, instead merely delighting in their primal connection with the worm, an extension of their worship. If nothing else, this makes them easier to control and coordinate in battle, being much more accustomed to their transformations and long-time existence as warpwolves. That said, warpwolves are, for the most part, not especially long-lived creatures. The continual warping magic and the effects of the elixir take an inevitable toll, and thus they live for 50 years or so, following a similar life cycle as a normal human, even should they die a non-violent death away from battle. Occasionally, however, upon transformation for a newcomer or reaching maturity for one from the bloodlines, a warpwolf can display a vastly greater level of control, complemented by the distinct shadow of human intelligence and cunning, visible, and sometimes clearly so, through the swirling maelstrom of violence just waiting to be unleashed. Unlike their feral siblings, they are capable of balancing their beast and human natures in both forms. But this is not to say that they are in any way restrained in their conduct. Rather, they channel their bloodthirst and fury with conscious human intent. Such is their retained intelligence while in beast form, they are able to wield arms with the same dexterity as any human duelist, except with all the strength of 10 feet or more of bipedal lupine mass behind it. Once a warpwolf is identified as one of these superior specimens, they are conditioned extensively in many ways, whether it be in the use of weapons best suited to the greater bulk of a warpwolf or greater harnessing of their primal magic, warping themselves in subtler, more refined ways. Instead of simple manipulations of their muscles or their bones, the warpwolf stalkers, as they are known, can warp their skin to blend in with their surroundings when light is low, fooling their prey into seeing shadows, and once in battle they are capable of imbuing themselves with unnatural strength and endurance during the fight, allowing them to tear through whole platoons of soldiers before any have time to realize what has happened, including the wolf themselves. These stalkers are honed into the finest yet most brutal of the Blackclad's weapons. Rarest of the warpwolves, for only a few are born each generation, are the purebloods, who can trace their ancestry through several generations of warpwolves. These beasts are distinctive for their white fur, lack of a human form, and rapid growth during their childhood, reaching maturity by the age of 10 or so. Such is this purity that many pureblood warpwolves survive to be 100 years or more, remaining at their peak of physical capabilities well towards the end of their lives. Purebloods are born and blessed with a peculiar magic that not only allows them to warp in distinct and precise ways, but also grants them an undeniable presence within warpwolf communities. Ferals, stalkers, and even their bloodline elders gravitate towards them and accede to their will, sometimes even developing skills or greater control and awareness over their warping and primal instincts through interactions with the pureblood. Without a doubt, though, the other warpwolves take the pureblood's lead in battle. Because of this, pureblood warpwolves hold a unique position of respect within the ranks of the Circle Orboros, and coupled with their rarity, many junior druids consider it an honor to be joined in battle by a pureblood, with or without an attendant pack. The decision to do so is often random, for while the purebloods follow the orders of the Potents and Omnipotents, they are just as likely to follow their own instincts in seeking those battlefields where they feel they can have the greatest effect. It is unsurprising, then, that because of their rarity and fickle nature, bound by both their primal drives and human intelligence, their importance makes them the subject of no small possessiveness by the druids, and so they typically dwell among the most vital sacred centers of the dominions, where they both protect and can be protected. Every so often, however, notable feral warpwolves of unsurpassed ferocity are created. These are invariably not from the warpwolf bloodlines, who have fully embraced their madness to be able to provide control to their destruction, however unbridled it may appear to be. Such cases as Loki and Getorix, however, are special for their utter savagery and brutality that is a reflection of their initial transformations. In both cases, though one is human and the other a Tharn, they were prisoners of the druids, and the elixir was forced upon them without any prior knowledge of either the process or its end result. Such was their frenzied change into beast form, they could not be tamed or brought to heel by the attending druids, requiring those of much greater power to bring them to heel. Cromac the Ravenous, having already bested him to take him prisoner, hunted Getorix down for weeks and subdued the former Tharn king in the end. Meanwhile, Tanith, the feral song, took a more conciliatory approach with Loki, and she trained him to channel his viciousness into becoming the perfect hunter. But while Getrix and Loki display the popular stereotypical traits of warpwolves, all teeth and claws with some measure of human or thought intellect, they are not exemplars of what a truly powerful warpwolf is capable of, in marrying their primal strength and abilities with the cunning of a pre-transformation mind and the primal magic found within them. Instead, one would need to look towards another notable warpwolf, a pureblood known as Rokloff. Were it not for Kruger the Stormlord's manipulation and his own past bound to a warlock killed in battle, he might have achieved even more than what little we know of him. Rokloff's life before reaching maturity and being placed in service with a warlock is unknown, but it is likely that it is much as other purebloods. But unlike the majority of examples, he did not display the typical trappings of the charismatic sort around whom other warpwolves would gravitate. Nothing we know of him suggests he had much by way of influence over or alpha behavioral contact with other warpwolves, and we can be quite certain that Rokloff was rarely, if ever, an alpha pureblood, even if he had more than sufficient power to be one. But it is under his first mistress, the potent Selestria, that we find snippets of information that tell us much of his nature. Such was his control that he required much less efforts than even the most grounded of warpwolves in warping his vocal cords to retain a human-sounding voice, and was not especially difficult to understand. Once one got over the surprise of conversing with a warpwolf, that is. Further, he proved quite apt and able as he applied his mind more than was typical of even a pureblood, being aware of Celestria's plans and goals and actively participating in their execution. She no doubt had an effect in helping him keep his wolfen urges under heel and cultivating his own magical abilities. The last great task that fell to the late Potent was the studying of dragonblight in her territories within the Northern Dominion. This brought her into conflict with Caedoran forces and the Old Witch, who was the only one who could detect the activities of the Druids, careful and secretive as most of Circle Orboros' Potents made a habit to be. As the two adversaries fought, so too did Rokloff against the invaders, and the struggle took them to ever more blighted lands until the Old Witch tricked Selestria and struck her down in battle. As a warbeast, Rokloff felt her death, and as she died, so too did a part of him. There and then he too wished to die, and fought on through rage and grief before being overwhelmed and brought down. He was presumed dead by the victors, who left what they thought was a corpse. Rokloff was shocked at his survival and found himself unwilling to die, and he as much as willed himself to recovery, dragging his body over blighted land in doing so. In this state, when he came upon a small pond, he succumbed to a moment of weakness. Normally, he would never so much as contemplate consuming blighted water, but he was still near death, and he still bore the grief of losing his mistress, so he drank, and thus did he condemn himself. From that moment onwards, his body would be blighted, and the blight within him would only grow. After Celestria's death, Rokloff came to serve Morvahna, the Dawn Shadow. Unfortunately, perhaps because he knew he would die of the blight within him, he was swayed by the promises spoken by Kruger the Stormlord, who enticed him into his, albeit covert, service with a cure that likely did not and does not exist. Though weakened by the blight, it did not affect his combat abilities or his particular form of magic that could, perversely, aid in the process of eradicating blight from the land. In his final days, it was this task Rokloff carried out under Morvahna's orders, aiding Potent Lyvene's subordinates. Even when almost completely overcome by dragonblight, he fought and did what he could in his weakened state, more as the case because there was none present to help him restrain himself from the more uncontrollable of a warpwolf's primal instincts. Despite all that, he was, especially for a warpwolf, pureblood or not, able to die a dignified death. The curiosity in Rokloff's abilities lies within his seemingly unnatural wisdom and his unprecedented magic, even if it was manifested within him with the aid of Morvahna. The power within him to aid the purge of blight, despite suffering from it himself, is unheard of. So far was it beyond the typical magic found within all purebloods. Ironically, it was the conventional use of Warpwolf's magic, the eponymous warping, that caused the blight to manifest, doing so in much the same way as in Everblight's Nis and Ogren underlings. However, Rokloff understood the power of druidic magic and how he could complement it, up to and including the point of inflicting a facade of compulsion on humans. Most important of all was the amplifying effect that his blood, or any blood for that matter, had on druids' magical strength. Such was his control over his magical abilities that he could isolate the blight within him and allow his blood to remain untainted, even though, towards the end, this would become more and more difficult. Neither Getrix nor Loki can claim the potential that Rokloff could, but the pureblood would, regrettably, never reach it.